Okay, everybody, welcome to Burning Bridges. It's April 1st, and I think we have a fun topic for you today, and it's not an April Fool's joke. Today we're talking about the Ronin network hack that I'm sure you've heard about recently. Got some nice spicy hot takes for you, and yeah, Arjun, Pranay, are you familiar with what Ronin is and why it exists? Because I honestly wasn't until this morning when I was doing some research.
A little bit. I just know it has something to do with Axie Infinity.
Yeah.
So Ronin is basically like, the Axie ecosystem is massive. They have a lot of users and a lot of things going on. So they moved to their own chain called Ronin a little while back as a mechanism to scale.
And maybe just
get
to
off
recap,
of like Ethereum.
What is Axie Infinity?
Axie is a play to earn game.
Okay.
That is hugely popular.
Gotcha.
I think it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, play to earn game right now.
Yeah. So blockchain game sounds like they, from reading their white paper, it sounds like they deployed to the Loom blockchain initially, and their goal was to just have a side chain that had low execution costs, so they could just deploy their game to that and facilitate bridging via this side chain.
Exactly. And their bridge is basically like, so you have the Ronin chain itself, which is made up of the Ronin chain validators. There's 9 validators, and then the bridge was basically those 9 validators attesting updates coming from Ethereum to, like, if you locked funds on Ethereum, those 9 validators would like sign to then create those funds on Ronin.
Yeah.
I think the best tweet I saw on this was by Left Terrace. He is like, I see everybody complaining about a big hack. Totally get it. It's a lot of money. But I have one main question. What is Ronin, and how come I'm hearing about it for the first time? Which I felt the same way about Poly Network. That's the amusing thing, because like when the Poly Network hack happened and it was the largest one at 611 million, I'm like, what the hell is a poly network, and is it related to a polygon? Is it related to a polychain? Like, what is this?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, I think like, I guess you don't really hear about a lot of these things until they get hacked, and then of course everybody hears about them, which is not really great. I think Poly Network was a particularly interesting case because they like kind of grew, like launched very quietly and then grew very quickly out of nowhere. And then of course that led to, it didn't lead to them being hacked, but of course like that hack led to then people finally becoming aware that they existed.
Yeah. Yeah, it seemed like they were kind of walking along a pretty typical "quote unquote" progressive decentralization, playbook, which is exactly like we've been, something we talk about a lot here on Burning Bridges, where they kind of had, completely permissioned set of smart contracts on Loom, and then, deployed them "quote unquote" permissionlessly to this Ronin blockchain. But the way that the infrastructure for this was set up was obviously not entirely distributed, as it were.
Right. So I think that's one of the interesting. So I guess like there's obviously been a lot of bridge hacks now. Been over $1 billion or close to $1 billion in bridge hacks this year only, which is terrifying. I'm reasonably confident that because the TVLs of all of these bridges is growing really rapidly, and because the sophistication of attacks is growing, and because people are realizing bridges are this massive honeypot, I'm reasonably confident that the next large bridge hack is likely to be over $1 billion, which is just a ridiculous sum. These are like the largest cybersecurity violations that have really existed in the space, and I think potentially even outside of the space.
I saw somebody had another really good take, which is like in Web 2, we got data breaches. In Web 3, we get liquidity breaches. And so what has been happening is the equivalent of the Equifax breach, where like 100 million Americans lost their social security numbers and got a lot of their information stolen, and were susceptible to identity theft because hackers found a way into a repository of all of their private data. This is the same thing, but it's happening with their money rather than data. So these things will continue to happen until better practices improve. But it's not like this doesn't have precedent. It just has precedent in a different media, which is information rather than money, or rather than value.
Yeah, I think maybe it would be a good idea to like jump into what actually happened with the hack, because I think the story of it is also quite interesting, because this hack was not like most of the other bridge hacks, and we should and I think like there's a lot of really interesting discussion around that's happening right now. Let's take a step back and
I'm gonna post a tweet really quick. There's a really good Substack post that the Axie Infinity team posted, or the Ronin team, I should say. And while we're talking about that, you can probably follow along, because some good tidbits in there. And it's especially interesting the way some of these things are worded, which I wanted to touch upon. Yeah, tweets on the space now. You can take it away.
Awesome. There's a bunch of really interesting things. The first is with the Poly network hack, with the wormhole hack, and with pretty much most of the hacks that have happened, the larger scale hacks that have happened in the space, this wasn't a smart contract vulnerability, which is interesting, because we actually talked about this after the wormhole hack. We had a Burning Bridges episode where we talked about this, and we talked about how everything that we had seen so far at that point had been smart contract vulnerabilities, but it was only a matter of time until like the root of trust was actually compromised, until we got either social engineering attacks or economic collusion attacks that resulted in these bridges being hacked. And so it's kind of it's sad that it happened so soon, but it was inevitable at some point. I think the other thing that's interesting is that in this case, there was also like obviously the SkyMavis team is fantastic. They've built an incredible product, but this was also an OPSEC failure, where this was a 5 out of 9 validator system. So 5 out of 9 verifiers in the system, multi-sig participants had to sign to get funds across the bridge, and 4 of those were run by SkyMavis. And not a lot of details have been disclosed around this yet, but all 4 of those were compromised at the same time, which leads me to believe that they were probably in the same environment, that the security of these things was effectively shared security. And what that means is that those 4 keys were effectively 1 key, turning this 5 out of 9 system into a 2 out of 5 system, which is very, very different security paradigm. And then on top of that, you had so the attacker gained control over whatever system was hosting these 4 keys, and controlled them. And then on top of that, they also found an RPC that was being run by the Axie DAO, that was no longer operational, so it was no longer being used. That was a special gas-free RPC that had been whitelisted and created like back in late 2021 to do gas fee transactions on Ronin. And that RPC still, the remaining key, the one that was controlled by Axie DAO, was still connected to that RPC. It was still able to receive message signature requests from that RPC, and it wasn't doing any validation on what the signature requests were. And so the attacker was then also able to get control of this compromised RPC and use that to get the Axie DAO validator to sign an arbitrary message. In this case, a message also attesting that these funds needed to be unlocked.
Big oof.
Yeah. This is this is like, I think a bunch of people have said this. Mood posted about this actually as well, and like and a bunch of other folks have started talking about this, that like this is a sophisticated attack, right? It's not someone was just scrolling through random on-chain contracts, found a reentrancy vulnerability and like exploited it, or found some random little thing and exploited it in the Solidity contract. This was somebody who clearly was like casing this for a while, who has spent an inordinate amount of time preparing for this attack, and had a very large amount of information about the architecture of these systems, the owner of the keys, and these potential vulnerabilities associated with the infrastructure that Axie was running, which is fascinating. I mean, it's horrible and also fascinating, because it indicates that like the sophistication, the level of security that people need to now think about is much higher than what it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that just to kind of echo one of the things you're saying, and maybe minor correction. I think SkyMavis was running this gas RPC as well.
Oh, interesting.
What it seems basically the reason why I called out the wording here is basically one of the things that the team wrote in this Substack post was that the this is just so unfortunate that they did this, but the AxiDAO validator key was basically, it seemingly delegated, access to this key was delegated to the team that was running this RPC, the SkyMavis team. And it seems like they probably did this via some sort of cloud permissions, AWS permissions, for example. And so SkyMavis was operating the infrastructure to run this RPC, but the cloud access was delegated and was never revoked. So it seems like, this is a pretty typical cloud infrastructure hack where you gain access to the cloud infrastructure via some, backdoor, and then they just kind of walked around the network until they found something interesting, and they got 4 keys from the infrastructure hack and then a free one from this gas estimator thing, which it must have been their lucky day. They must have been stoked when they found that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess like, I don't know. I mean, I suppose like it's the fact that they knew to, interesting. The fact that they knew to sign this arbitrary payload, though, indicates that they must have known exactly what that was for, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing that I find this most similar to in terms of recent just infrastructure hacks in general. Do you remember Solarwinds? Did you hear about this?
I have not.
Solarwinds was a piece of network security software that basically the entire governments of the world, governments, institutions, companies, Fortune 500s were running. And a state actor basically was able to, I'm pretty sure it was Russia, was able to basically compromise this piece of software that sits centrally in every corporate network and, just do nefarious things. And that's basically what happened here. They compromised their cloud infrastructure and were able to do nefarious things by just kind of jumping from one thing to the next, it seems like. That's my hunch. Obviously, we don't know for sure what happened, but I'm really interested to see what, kind of comes out of about this in the next weeks.
Yeah, definitely interested to see more of a transparency report, because I think right now not a lot of details have been disclosed, and I understand why, but also I do think like I'm excited to see a postmortem. But yeah, it's interesting because it's like we haven't really dealt with these kinds of hacks very often in the space, largely because the whole idea behind having, so we have dealt with these kinds of hacks, but they're always on centralized exchanges. And in the goal of having decentralized exchanges, the goal of having on-chain smart contracts, the goal of having these like permissionless autonomous protocols that are just based on Solidity code is that you don't have to deal with the complexity and as a result of that complexity, increased attack surface associated with all of this off-chain infrastructure that has like access control over these funds. And of course we've talked a lot about like the trust considerations of multi-sigs and like collusion vectors. So what happens if you bribe certain number of these validators to cheat and to try to steal funds? But then there's also the other end of the spectrum, which is like, what happens if they're just compromised? If they're compromised, all of a sudden you have a very, very different paradigm where it's like you're subject to the same vulnerability that you were subject to in terms of collusion, but now it's not happening because the team is trying to rug their own system. It's happening because there was just a security vulnerability and the attacker just has access to all this stuff now.
This is a really good point. And I always go back to this tweet that Zaki Manian posted like I think it was almost 2 years ago or a year and a half ago that was very prescient, which it was a very pithy tweet. It was like, bridge hacks are the new centralized exchange hacks.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it's just like since then, it's like the same magnitude, like Mountain Gox, Quadriga, all these things are happening again at the same magnitudes because this is the honeypot that has not been battle tested and reached maturity yet. And to your point, Arjun, like centralized exchange hacks, there's no real way around that other than to develop better OPSEC practices because by nature it's centralized. There's not really a way to achieve security without the private entity that runs the system learning how to do it better. But part of what smart contracts and the idea of open source supports is security through ubiquity. That you're not trying to hide something or protect it or make it more impenetrable. You're saying I'm putting all the shit out there and it's using public infra that is very, very secure and decentralized. And even if you everybody can look and find a hole, and that's why we audit these things. We make sure they're good, so that once they're thrown out there, they're immutable and they're good to go. And so we should transition more to systems that use this immutable infrastructure layer that is secured by a lot of people, rather than these private ones that requires on the operational excellence of n number of parties, where n is not an unbounded set.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
even if it is an unbounded set, I mean, I think it's still, there are still like, if it's an unbounded set, you now introduce another, like an entirely different class of attack vectors, which are equally problematic. Things like Sybil. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Like from a security context, in any system, the largest vulnerability is always the human beings.
Yeah,
that was my Zen moment of this morning. I think I gotta stop there and process that while I cook my eggs.
One thing that I thought was pretty funny from the Substack posts at the very bottom is they have a little Q&A section. The question is, why was the threshold only 5 of 9, which seems low if you have a multisig of 9. And the answer was originally SkyMavis chose the 5 out of 9 threshold as some nodes didn't catch up with the chain or were stuck in sinking state. Moving forward, the threshold will be 8 of 9. And just when you have to compromise your multisig because your validators aren't syncing, that's not great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess what happens next? So, I mean, there's been obviously SkyMavis is like engaged authorities, is engaged chain analysis. They're trying to get the funds back. There's also been discussions about figuring out ways to reimburse. Reimbursing $650 million is obviously a hefty task. But at the same time, so is laundering $650 million. And so it's like, on the one hand, you have this attacker that managed to steal this extremely sizable, category defining amount of funds. But on the other hand, it's similar to a lot of the attacks that happened on centralized exchanges, the very large scale ones where what do you do afterwards? Is there even a way to do anything with those funds? And I think that's been a criticism that's been tossed around a little bit. Not criticism, but there's been a comment that's been tossed around, which is like, well, what's going to happen from here? There's no Tornado Cash definitely does not support, cannot support an anonymity set high enough or large enough to anonymize that amount of money.
Yeah, like there's not that much liquidity in Tornado.
Yeah.
Wait, what do you mean? You're saying that I can't just deposit it in FTX?
Well, apparently not.
I think Sam will snitch on you for that one.
No.
Please, Sam, no snitching, please.
Have you guys seen so if you look at the Etherscan page of the wallet that is currently holding all of those funds, the comments on that Etherscan page, because Etherscan added the ability to add comments and things. The comments are hilarious. I mean, obviously some of them are like people being like, please give me my money back, which is totally fair. It's a very ridiculous amount of money. But then there's also a lot of just simping, which is so funny to me, where people are like, you stole $650 million. Can you please, give me $5,000 to help me feed my family? And it's like, what? Yeah, it's quite interesting.
That's a twist. It's actually Robinhood. The hacker is trying to create a UBI for people.
Yeah. I haven't checked it recently, but I'm reasonably confident that if you go and scroll through those comments, you're going to find at least some people that are like, oh, like the quintessential phishing scams that you get when you're in any Discord community in the space, which are like, oh, your wallet has an issue. Like, you need to copy paste your seed phrase into this text box.
Yeah, I mean, it's like thought experiment. What would happen if the attacker just airdropped the proceeds of this hack to just a bunch of individual accounts? Like, would there be any recourse for that? Probably not.
Somewhere the Mimblewimble people are laughing, being like, we designed the right system. The joke here is that Mimblewimble was a protocol that required the recipient of funds to also be online and acknowledge the receipt of their funds. So this couldn't work in that protocol.
I do like to be honest, the mass airdrop idea is probably the only way to actually get rid of these funds.
Yeah.
That or
just airdrop some of it to yourself.
So
put it all into Lido and farm DeFi.
Send it to your own node. Oh my god.
One question I wanted to talk about was I saw somebody had a hot take that was going around, which was that basically like this is why cross-chain bridges will never work. It's a flawed idea and it's a dead end. What do y'all got to say to that?
Au contraire, mon ami. I just think this makes me even more bullish for the right kinds of bridges.
Say more.
I mean, this isn't exactly a compromise of the economic security model, but it's definitely a compromise of the root of trust of this bridge. The trust assumptions that were kind of underpin the entire construction of this bridge, basically were just vulnerable to this kind of attack. So if you have a bridge that isn't vulnerable to in this particular instance a cloud security vulnerability, then a cloud security vulnerability just isn't a problem. So or it's a problem in a different way. So that's my hot take. I think that I'm just even more excited about optimistic bridges, Optimism, Arbitrum, Nomad, zero knowledge rollups in general. I don't think any of these, this particular hack, I don't think pulls away from the benefits that any of those bridges provide.
Right. I mean, for what it's worth, like, I would say like up until now, you weren't able to say that the wormhole bridge hack or the poly network hack or really any of the other kind of hacks that have happened around bridges in space, you really weren't able to say that like, okay, if you built a better mechanism, those bridge hacks wouldn't have happened. But in this case, there are absolutely better, safer bridge constructions that you could build that Ronin could have used that would have made it impossible. I mean, would have made it so that like compromising the keys would not have really accomplished anything, right? If you used Nomad, for instance, or even if you used like IBC, or if you built a zero knowledge bridge, in all of those cases, you don't have like that kind of access control. You don't have the ability for some off-chain set of actors to like arbitrarily withdraw any amount of funds from the system, and that means that it's you can compromise all of the keys that you want, but you're not actually going to lose funds. And this is, I think, James had posted about this from the Nomad team. We were talking about how the really interesting thing about Nomad is like, it's the core model is based around revocation rather than permission, which means that as long as some certain assumptions about the underlying chains and your ability to send transactions to them hold true, you can compromise the keys. You'll never actually lose funds. Users will like. There's no the intrinsic like construction of a good bridge stops that from happening.
So one question, maybe we can back up a little bit for folks who may not have been familiar with the way that Wormhole and Polynetwork and the other bridge hacks happened. What was different about this one? And front running my question a bit, what is the difference between a root of trust, compromising the root of trust versus what happened in the previous instances?
So in the previous instances, it was just like there was an implementation bug, right? There was either a bug in Solidity, in their Solidity smart contracts that allowed the attacker to like escalate permissions and steal funds, or there was in Wormhole's case, there was a bug in the Solana dependencies that they were utilizing that allowed the attacker to like spoof a bunch of signatures rather than actually require them. In this case, by root of trust, we mean that like the core security model itself was compromised rather than the implementation. The off-chain signers to this bridge, the validators that were actually verifying things, were the ones that were attacked, which is a different model completely. In Wormhole, nothing ever happened to the validators. Nothing ever happened to. There was not even an attempt to attack the validators. It was just like it was an implementation problem only, and that's an important distinction, because like, the Wormhole attack could have happened on a rollup bridge, and there were a lot of people who, when the Wormhole hack happened, said, oh well, this is why we need rollups. This is why we shouldn't have multi-chain or cross-chain. We should only stick to this like rollup-centric world. Which, for what it's worth, like there are huge, incredible security benefits to rollups. Rollups are an awesome construction that actually gives you like best-in-class trust minimization on top of a single chain. But at the same time, those rollup bridges are also built by teams writing code in Solidity. They can also get hacked in the exact same way. There's nothing that stops that except for, audits, good security practices, and security bounties. And to be honest, sometimes a bit of luck. Like, like it is also like the Wormhole team is made, like Wormhole was built by Certus1, which is like one of the strongest security teams in the space. They are incredibly strong security team. They win security competitions internationally. They're like very, very sophisticated, and this still happened. In contrast, in this case, like this kind of attack, for like the Ronin kind of attack, would not be possible on a rollup bridge, or any other trustless bridge.
So should we go to just using rollups? What is the downside of that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this gets into the like question that's been floating around a little bit, which is like, is cross-chain a dead end? And I think what that comes down to is whether or not you believe that there will be multiple settlement layers. And by settlement layers, I mean like Ethereum L1 is a settlement layer. You'll build a bunch of rollups on top of it, and eventually the idea is to get to the point where Ethereum's goal is basically just to provide economic security, to just be like the core set of validators that is like securing these things. It's not actually running applications directly, but you're building systems like rollups on top that are themselves running the application. And what it comes down to is whether you think that there'll be multiple of those. At this stage, there are, right? There are many different L1 chains. Of course, when the market shrinks and expands again, and shrinks and expands again, some of them will die, some of them won't. But ultimately, like, there are some people that, in objectively, from in a kind of like closed room hypothesis situation, having a single security layer probably makes sense, because it gives you the best possible security in the world, right? Everybody is just mining the same chain. But the reality is that like bag holders exist, tribes exist, people have different ideas around different trade-offs, people want to support different ecosystems. So whether or not we'll end up in that kind of world seems unlikely, to me at least. Interested to hear your thoughts as well.
I would agree with that. And I would even take it a step further and say that beyond just the tribalism or the economic incentives for different settlement layers with different validators or security providers, whatever you want to call it, I think it's actually good for resilience of this whole space. Because if everything coalesces around one security network, then you can throw more resources at it and you can make it the most powerful one, but it still remains a single point of failure, just a really big and tough to penetrate one. But if it creates a black swan risk when there's only one. So having more gives you a secondary, tertiary type backups. But I do think that the number of very strong settlement layers will not be like, it's not going to be a vast number. It's not going to be thousands. I mean, I think at its most it'll be, I think, hundreds. It's tough to make these predictions, but we already have kind of three really big ones, which are Ethereum, Polkadot, and then if you think about Cosmos via IBC as one way of looking at a shared security layer, I shouldn't use those words. You get three ecosystems that need some type of cross-security boundary interoperability between them, and there's going to be more, of course. So,
yeah. I want to couch. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to maybe reframe Pranay's question a little bit. Like Pranay asked, is cross-chain dead? And really, I think a better question that would also be interesting to explore is, could Ronin, are we all going to use rollups? Could Ronin have been a rollup? I think a better question also would be, are application sidechains dead?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I want to couch this in saying that, I want to couch this discussion in saying that, we're all sort of trying to take a pragmatic approach here. We've all been researchers into scalability and interoperability, and it's been largely focused around Ethereum for the past few years, for a long time. But it's sort of it's difficult to I would certainly classify myself as a long-term ETH maxi, but at the same time, it's difficult to say what's going to happen. And it seems likely that even if there is a long-term single settlement layer paradigm, even if that's the case, it's difficult to say what things like rollups will look like on top. It's difficult to say what the trade-offs between rollups and other kinds of layer 2 constructions like volitions how those will work, because it's just too early. And it's unclear whether all of that will lend itself to needing bridges or not. At the moment, it looks like yes. At the moment, it looks like we're heading towards an asynchronous world, and by that I mean a world where not everything is able to be synchronously composable with one another. You will be able to have applications that talk to other applications running in different environments. They may be rollups or whatever, but those applications may not be able to talk to each other in the same block. And if that's the case, then bridges will need to exist. They will, because that fundamentally what a bridge is doing is adding that asynchrony.
Big time.
And one thing I was going to add is Starkware is doing some interesting stuff with they're positioning L3s, right? So execution environments that inherit the security of execution environments that inherit their security from the base layer. So similar to the computer science statement, it's turtles all the way down, it's L2s or it's layers all the way down. And I really like using physical world metaphors. So the way I think about it is there will be different regions. Like New York City is going to be obviously very economically powerful region, but there's also satellites around it, Newark and other suburbs. And there's probably satellites around those suburbs too, but the economic activity occurring on each of these is going to be orders of magnitude lower. The level of the unit of removal it has from the base settlement layer, because in order to really get to the high level of economic activity, you need to be close to the source of greatest security.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And maybe just kind of extend what you're saying. I'm personally bullish, maybe not on the viability of such a thing, but on the fact that it's going to happen, on application-specific execution environments. So, people have been talking about sharding for a long time, and I think application shards, maybe not the next big thing, but they're going to be a big thing in the next year or so, is my hot take there.
I mean, they already are. Look at Cosmos, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. My other hot take is I'm bullish on the shared security of kind of the Polkadot ecosystem, where you have parachains that can launch application shards that basically share the security model of the global relay chain, beacon chain, relay chain.
Cool. So I'll take the Cosmos Maxi positioning then, so we have one of each on this panel.
So you, Connor, you had asked if Ronin could be a rollup or should be a rollup. I think it can. I think historically, at least from what I've seen from talking to a lot of the projects that are out there, especially the ones that scale and then need to go in the direction of building their own chain, they're not necessarily doing that because they want to do that. They're doing that because they have to do that, right? Building and operating a blockchain is a giant pain in the ass. It is not running validator server blockchain is not an easy task. Especially it depends on the kind of chain that it is, but if it's like an Ethereum chain, there can be a lot of like complexity involved. Even with Cosmos chains, there's a lot of complexity involved. There are like failure modes. Your chain could halt. You could basically like end up in scenarios where users either lose funds or much more likely your system just freezes and now users can't really do anything. And I think if the way to kind of get out of that is that ideally you don't have to do this whole task of needing to go bootstrap a validator set. And by that I mean when you create a chain, you have to go and get people to verify that chain. You have to go and get people to mine that chain, or like or to basically be like POS validators on that chain.
Or just one person 4 times.
Or that. And I think like if you're doing that, then so doing that and actually doing it well and actually decentralizing it, like the reason that SkyMavis had owned 4 validators is because getting a very large decentralized set of validators is a lot of work. Arguably, that is what L1 chains do. That's their target customer is a large decentralized set of validators, and then they have this interface on top where you can go and build applications and utilize that infrastructure. But what an L1 is doing is they're basically a marketplace for economic security. And so one side of their marketplace is people who are providing that, which is the validators, and the other side is people who are consuming that. And not everyone wants to build a marketplace for economic security as part of their product, right? Like people typically have a focus on their own product and would much rather be dealing with that instead. Now, the nice thing about rollups is, and especially optimistic rollups, is that you don't actually need to do any of that. You just run a sequencer, and eventually you can have a decentralized set of sequencers. You could even have something more interesting, which is like almost Polkadot-like model where you have like a shared set of public sequencers that are like basically posting data for many different rollups. And I think Hubble has, which is a rollup project trying to create application-specific rollups, has talked about this.
I think they're called collators in Polkadot.
Oh, interesting. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely collators.
But yeah, like if you basically have these entities that are much easier to run. All they're doing is reading data from the rollup and posting it to Ethereum, and that's it. You don't need any validators. Your failure modes are very, very limited. Your rollup is not going to stop unless there's like fraud happening. And in general, user funds, you don't have to worry about the security of user funds because now you have this rollup bridge that is baked in that actually gives you like fully trust minimized security, right? It gives you the same exact security as the chain that you're on top of. I think that's just like, we're not there yet, but it's going to be a lot easier than starting a chain.
And taking it one step further, sorry, Connor.
No, it's okay.
I want to make a point about Polkadot, since I think people sleep on Polkadot a lot because it has a bit of a separate origin from the Ethereum and Cosmos ecosystems that a lot of us participate in. But Polkadot takes that a step further and says, if you can predict your computational needs over a longer span of time, then we can give you guaranteed compute at lower cost to the system overall. This is kind of like if you're using AWS, if you need a spot instance, then it can be more expensive than if you have a reserved instance that you'll need like some level of load over a certain time frame, right? And so Polkadot says, instead of hooking in a rollup and buying block space on demand whenever your sequencer posts it to the settlement layer, just do a parachain auction, buy the parachain spot for X amount of time. And what we can actually do is, because we know that the demand is predictable and we know how much compute there's going to be, we can actually allocate the validators' compute in a more efficient way that actually scales super linearly. So there's a lot of benefits to this, but it's very similar to economic models in the real world, where if you have low time preference, or if you can guarantee purchasing something over a lot of time, you actually get benefits and efficiencies. And we might even see popular rollups like Optimism and Arbitrum. I wonder if they will start to converge towards this, where if there's a floor to the demand or baseline amount of block space that they consume, maybe they will actually get into engagements or figure out a way to work with the validators to get cheaper purchasing power from of the block space.
Right.
Yeah, I think like efficiency is like the name of the game here. Going back to Web 2 for a hot second, like the thing that like drove the cloud revolution, is the compartmentalization of specialized, resources and knowledge. So when you have AWS, you as a person building a product and an application don't have to hire an infrastructure team and rack servers and do all that hard stuff. The security of your data center is just not a concern for you anymore. And I think if we have a similar thing in crypto, obviously I'm bullish on Polkadot. Like the fact that an application developer or a parachain developer doesn't have to worry about strong consensus. All they have to worry about is just collecting data, passing it up to the grandpa consensus chain, and just I think as that model develops, the ability and the efficiency of developing blockchain applications is going to drastically decrease. And if you don't have the ability to screw up your consensus layer, then it's not going to be a problem. Hopefully, it's my pie in the sky hope.
Yeah. Again, making a blockchain not an easy thing to do. Distributed systems, having spent many years in wading through the pain of building distributed systems, do not build distributed systems. They're just not a fun experience. If you can operate on top of an existing blockchain, build an application on top of an existing blockchain or an existing environment that doesn't require you to deal with the problems associated with distributed systems, that's wonderful. It's super easy to build a DeFi application right now. And that's the reason why we've had such rapid innovation. But building the systems themselves is stupendously difficult.
In distributed systems, there's a famous theorem called the cap theorem, and you trade off between consistency, availability, and pain tolerance as a distributed systems developer.
Yeah.
Sorry, had to do it to him like that.
I'm laughing because the last one isn't pain tolerance, but it is effectively pain tolerant.
Yeah, it's actually partition tolerance, which is like how much can the network heal? Like how well does it heal? Which the joke here is that distributed systems developers also have to bear this pain tolerance themselves when they build these things, because they're very, very tough to reason about, and the failure modes are just so sporadic and like Byzantine, really.
So we've talked a bunch about why it's not great to have to run your own chain. Everybody that is running their own chain will be able to empathize with this because they are having to deal with this pain themselves. It's not great to have to run any sort of distributed system in production. So why is Ronin doing it? And I think that really just comes down to it's early, right? Like at this stage, I mean, there are definitely people who have started forking some of the rollup implementations. Optimism is the main one that's been forked just because of its simplicity at this stage. It's still not viable for a lot of these ecosystems to just go straight into a rollup. And largely, I think at this stage, it's just because of cost. So like, rollups are still like an order of magnitude or sometimes a couple of order of magnitudes more expensive than a chain like Polygon, for instance. And that's definitely going to get cheaper. We have like there's a proposed EIP that is in works right now, which changes the way that Ethereum, rather than requiring rollups to post call data to Ethereum, which is expensive, it adds support for like blob transactions, basically arbitrary packets of data that you just post to the chain for data availability. And so now that data is not being executed on, it's just being used as storage. And it's just kind of just sits there, but that's fine, because what you want to make sure that data is available to everybody so that they can do a proof in case somebody like in case the rollup sequencer cheats. The right now you actually have to post all of that data to chain and pay a lot of gas, but when the blob format goes live, that now becomes near zero cost. And things like that are going to like really, really scale rollups. Like these, like I think people are underestimating, you know, of course, a lot of folks are kind of convinced that like rollups are intrinsically a more expensive system and a less scalable system because you have to post data to chain and because it's a layer 2 rather than its own chain. But I think we will actually get to the point where the economics of a rollup are actually better, more favorable than the economics of a sidechain or of another layer 1, where the transaction cost will be much cheaper while still benefiting from the same level of security, at least than a sidechain that has a very sufficiently decentralized validator set and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, my joke here is that it's too easy to copy pasta Ethereum, and copy pasting rollups needs to be easier.
It will be soon. Yeah, I mean, I think the stuff that Optimism has done with like with their canon is actually incredible, because basically what they're doing is they're just running Geth as the rather than building a custom rollup implementation, what they've done is they've built an interpreter so that they can run Go code and literally just run Geth on Ethereum. And what that means is, at a certain point, like all you're doing is you're instead of just forking Geth, you are now forking Geth plus Optimism canon, and it's the exact same mechanism, but now you don't need to deal with, validators and consensus and all those other icky things.
Right, but why not just use Substrate? This is what Substrate was trying to do for the last 4 or 5 years. It's like pretty much the same thing. You have everything you need to build your own app-specific chain. You plug into the settlement layer, and boom, you're good to go. Why should we use Geth, which has a lot of cruft and a history of not being architected for this, when we could use something that is almost like explicitly an SDK?
Because new is scary,
I think
Pranay.
Because
it
what?
is.
New is scary, Pranay.
Okay, fair. Fair. You just basically said it's Lindy, bro. We should just use Bitcoin. We should just stop there.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, Bitcoin does have crazy Lindy, right? Like there's a reason why there's still so many people who fork Bitcoin to do things that, and in many cases, it doesn't even make sense. It's like more work to fork Bitcoin to do the thing that they want to do than it is to just fork Ethereum, and like write it into the VM rather than, or even just use Cosmos. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, I think Polkadot's doing some interesting things here. I think a part of the reason is, I think a large part of it is just like that developer mindshare. It's like with Polkadot, you are having to, so there's a couple of things. With Polkadot, you're having to deal with the fact that you have this entirely separate ecosystem that a lot less people are familiar with. And so Lindy actually really, really does matter. And then the other piece of that is also just like, I think people have kind of gotten used to even if you're using it just for like an application specific use case, I think a lot of people have gotten used to the EVM. That's not a good thing necessarily. I mean, I understand that the EVM has its own drawbacks, but as an ETH maxi, I can say, like, if you're a developer, it's a lot easier to build on top of the EVM than on other systems, only because there are more resources. That's the only reason. And because, generally it's better supported, generally there's like more activity there, you're more likely to be able to have an easy time doing integrations. I mean, we run into this all the time with Connexter, where, we would love to be able to support a lot of these non-EVM chains. We just don't. It's just a lot more work.
Yeah.
And we don't want to do it right now.
Hard Hat and Foundry are too good to give up.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I think this emphasizes the importance of, it kind of comes back to the question around, will people spin up their own validator sets and build these settlement layers? This is another indication that the answer might actually be yes, right? Because if people are more familiar with the model of fork Geth, and then you have like 100 validators that already know how to do it, and there's an economic incentive to drop an L1 token, and it's easier, you have a tool suite, then why not do it, right? So much of the ways things play out is predicated on what people find easy and the closest mental model. And a lot of what we're building is safe guardrails that allow people to use these systems that emerged more emergently. And I find that that's a thing that like theorists often discount, is that emergent properties of a system cannot be ruled out, and we need to, in spite of like a non-ideal outcome, build things that serve users at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
I actually got to jump, and that was a very zen moment for me. So I'm going to take that as an opportunity to peace out.
Good time to close out this week's Burning Bridge. Arjun, any final words before we close it out?
Nope. I guess my only final word would be, just bringing it back to the Ronin hack and kind of the discussions that we had. It does seem like more and more people are waking up to the idea that like we need better systems. And so I think advocating for that, going to teams and telling them, hey, what are you using? How does it work? What are the actual security assumptions around it? Are 4 of your keys in the same machine? Like that, those kinds of questions need to be asked. I think it's a really bad look for crypto that this keeps happening. I've spoken to folks from outside of the space recently, and like the only thing that they hear about crypto is the hacks, right? They might hear like 1 or 2 random things, the large majority of what people outside of the space are hearing is like scams and hacks. And that really like hurts the entire ecosystem. Like while it's easy to look at these things and say, okay, well, another project was hacked, like $650 million is a very sizable amount of money, and a lot of people will get screwed. And I think it hurts all of us as a whole when it happens.
Yeah, big time. Thanks everybody for showing up this week. We're on this new Twitter account. So this is your last chance to engage with our first tweet on this account. If you want something special, drop your ENS. You've got approximately 15 minutes before I cut off the little snapshot there.
Someone requested to speak.
Oh, nice. Well, we can let you give our final words. How's it going, Rick?
Happy to talk.
Welcome.
Well, we're actually done here. So show up
Excellent.
next time, and we'd love to talk to you about bridges.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.